These days, where there's so much divisiveness and micro-segmentation, I think people find it very relaxing to be in a situation where your only qualification is, which team are you rooting for? Or which Taylor Swift song are you going to karaoke? It kind of replenishes our soul.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Johnston, and this is the podcast where we explore the seismic shifts that are shaking up the way that we work and the way that we live. Y'all, I am so excited today to have on the Super Bowl czar, Michael Hecht, in the house. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Michelle. How are you?
We are really super excited because as you know, this podcast is just generating a lot of listeners. I think 150,000 tuned in the last time we looked. And because, people are interested in seismic shifts and what's going on and how can we adapt? How can we be the very best version of ourselves? And that's what we're trying to explore. And considering that in New Orleans, Louisiana, where this podcast is being recorded, we just experienced the Taylor Swift movement, which was a dress rehearsal for the Super Bowl in February in New Orleans. So can we just talk about the successful Swiftie weekend we just had?
It was seismic, no question. We welcomed up to 250,000 Swifties, which is actually probably about 100,000 more than we'll get for the Super Bowl. It was stunning. There was this ubiquitous Taylor Swift, which meant ubiquitous songs, ubiquitous glitter, but also this ubiquitous joy. I think that people are so tired of the divisiveness that the opportunity to come together in this kind of somewhat, vanilla, non-offensive monoculture and trade friendship bracelets was just culturally and emotionally what people needed. I haven't seen anything in this city where it was so uniformly full of energy and positivity, probably since 2010 when we won the Super Bowl. It was magical, and I give Taylor Swift and what she's able to do every night for 3.5 hours all the credit. There's something very special.
So I got to go with my daughter Friday night, and she flew in. She's a junior at the University of Florida. And she said 18 months ago, she went to a Taylor Swift concert, and we won't say what city, but she went to a city. And she said, Mom, it was night and day, her experience between the other city and this city. I said, tell me how. She said, you would never know that Taylor Swift was performing in the other city. It was just another concert. She said New Orleans was transformed, this entire city, to not just a celebration, but a welcome to the Taylor Swift fans, and let's come together. Who was in charge of wrapping the Superdome, Michael? That was brilliant, with a friendship bracelet.
That was Taylor Swift's team. I believe the individual, I'm forgetting his name, is out of Miami. And he had the idea of doing, the world's largest friendship bracelet. I actually saw it being blown up, and I had no idea what it was. I'm like, what are these marshmallows that they're blowing up on the ground? But that was very clever. And I've heard that from a number of people that, they saw it in Atlanta and it was fine. They saw it in Houston and it was a great concert. But what happened here was a shared cultural moment in the entire city. And of course, that's Taylor Swift. But as we can see from this kind of double-blind study, it says something about the intimacy and humanity of New Orleans, as well as just some logistical things, which is why we're so good at the Super Bowl, because the dome is less than a mile away from the French Quarter. Everything is compact. So this is not a situation where you have to drive out to the venue or Uber out or take a train. Everything is walkable. And, of course, that encourages the intimacy and the serendipity of bumping into a stranger and giving them a friendship bracelet.
And the police force was a part of it too. That's what I loved seeing is, it's one thing when you go through Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and if you're a local, like Michael and I are both locals, you realize that if you're super nice to the police officers, they're going to celebrate with you. And I feel like that was a part of the Taylor Swift movement too, is the police officers are going back and forth trading friendship bracelets. The police officers are dancing in the street with you. You know,
Yeah.
Bourbon Street, I heard, was the cleanest. I'm not the biggest fan of Bourbon Street. I love the French Quarter. I love everything about this city, not necessarily Bourbon Street. And I heard it was a karaoke session.
I saw, I was there for my uncle's 85th birthday at Galatoire's, and it was, I mean, I've never seen anything like that on Bourbon Street. It was an open air karaoke, and it wasn't that it was sanitized. It was still Bourbon Street, but it was clean, it was orderly, and it was accessible is probably the best word. And look, that is not just because of Taylor Swift. It's because in anticipation of the Super Bowl, we've been doing these quality of life sweeps with a partnership between the city and the state and about a dozen organizations. And we've just been taking those elements that break the law or that create an unwelcoming environment and saying that they can't be there. And it was really interesting to see the collective result of that, which is that we created a place which is still unmistakably Bourbon Street. I mean, you're never going to ever think that this is Seaside, right? But at the same time, felt welcoming for everybody of all ages, which is really what it needs to be.
So, Michael, I want to really go deep with some of the topics you just talked about. For our listeners who don't know who Michael Hecht is, I mean, I'm going to wow you with his background. So when I think about Michael Hecht, who has been named the Czar of the Super Bowl, and he's the CEO, he's an economic guru. He's also incredibly good with crises. So he was immediately tagged to be, one of the comeback guys in charge of economic development after Katrina. He was selected to be one of those business people to bring back small businesses after 9/11 in New York City. He went to Yale for his undergrad. He got his MBA at Stanford. So he's not only smart, he also has high EQ, so incredibly good with relationships. So you can understand why Governor Landry then tasked him to be the Super Bowl czar. Let's bring people together and make the Super Bowl not just a football game, but let's bring back an entire region. Because if you're listening and you're not from New Orleans or you're not from Louisiana, I'm sure your city and your region suffered during the pandemic too. We all did. We were not alone in not just like mental suffering, but economic suffering. It was incredibly hard. And this is an opportunity for our region to really come back and show the world that we're back. We're here. We're open for business. New Orleans, I want the Super Bowl to bring everybody together like Taylor Swift brought us together this last weekend. So how can we do it, Michael?
Well, I think that's a great point, is that Taylor Swift kind of gave us the model. And I think if you think, when we talk about the goals for the Super Bowl, which is basically a large coordination and execution exercise. And honestly, that's probably, if I have had any kind of superhero power, it probably is the ability to get people together in the room, give them coffee and carbohydrates, and just get them to start working together. And that's really what the Super Bowl requires, because there are probably 24 different organizations that are critical to getting all the infrastructure and beautification done. Our goals for the Super Bowl are three goals. The first is actually to have a great Super Bowl. So that means that the infrastructure is ready and looks and feels good. The second is to create improvements that we will enjoy for a decade or more further. And so, folks have said, is this a lipstick on a pig exercise? I said, no, this is a whole new hog. The repairs that we're doing to the streets, the lighting, the dozen or so murals that we're putting up around the city. These are enhancements, improvements, or repairs that we should enjoy into the next Super Bowl in a decade or so. And then the final one, and I think this is also where Taylor Swift was such an encouraging preamble, is that, of course, we're trying to impress the 200 million people about the Super Bowl, but we really are auditioning for the next Super Bowl, or the next convention, or the next business that might move here, or the next tourist that might come here. People always ask, what's the economic impact of the Super Bowl? And they measure that by ticket sales and hot dog sales and beer sales. That's like de minimis. What this is really about is it's one of the biggest opportunities in the world to tell the story of your place. It's a placemaking and place branding opportunity that's unmatched in America. And so that's really what we want people to take away, is that New Orleans is unique, it's human, it's culturally rich, but it's also welcoming for everybody. And so we're going to model on Taylor.
So I love that. And I just saw something yesterday on Instagram of not only was there a karaoke, what is it called? Just like singing, was an organic, it just happened on the streets of Bourbon Street, but also on flights that were leaving out of New Orleans on Sunday. It was the busiest day our airport has ever had on Sunday. And people are posting on Instagram recordings of on the flights of the whole, everybody singing on the airplane leaving our city too. There was something, you're right, you had mentioned just pure joy and positivity that this brought together. And we do need to capture this model, this secret ingredient, how the recipe, so that we can do this for other big events like the Super Bowl. So what is the model that we can take from Taylor Swift and apply to the Super Bowl so that it's something so much bigger that brings people together?
That's a great question. I think it is, besides obviously having an event that is compelling and exciting, I think it's, how do we recreate, or how do we not recreate, but how do we create the conditions for that joy?
Yes.
And I would say, now that you're asking me on the spot, that joy came out of a sense of freedom. I think people who were here for Taylor Swift felt free to be themselves, felt free to sing, felt free to talk to strangers, felt free to walk where they wanted to walk. And so that's about creating an environment that is intimate, that is accessible, including ADA accessibility, where people feel safety at a general level. It's not only about police presence, but just a general feeling of a space being welcoming, which is about lighting. It's about beautification. And I think that if we create an environment where individuals can feel there's a judgment-free zone, right? That's the best version of New Orleans. What I always tell, I think when we had breakfast, I said, the only real sin in New Orleans is being boring. And so I think people can come here and they can put on a dress no matter what their gender is. They can wear sparkles, no matter, they can sing even if they can't sing. It doesn't matter if you're 2 or 82, as long as you're being yourself and doing something a little bit interesting, New Orleans is going to love you. And so I think it's about recreating those conditions. And then what you'll see is a lot of the joy will be spontaneous. It'll be organic.
I think, so many vivid images are coming to my head listening to you talk, Michael. And one of them is, as you know, I believe that New Orleans does connection better than any other city. Mm-hmm. And I think Louisiana does connection. And a lot of it, and I've studied this, I'm semi-obsessed with connection, maybe fully obsessed. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what we do well is we have these rituals embedded into our rhythm, right? So one of the rituals being Mardi Gras that taps into the elements, the characteristics you just talked about. Freedom, individuality, inclusion, not being judged. If you're a guy, you can wear a dress. If you're a girl, you can dress like a guy. You can put glitter on. You can participate in an event like Mardi Gras however you choose. You can just be a bystander on the street with your neighbors and have just as much fun than if you choose to ride in the parade, than if you choose to be a dancer, than if you choose to spend your Friday at Galatoire's on the Friday before. There are so many opportunities to be a part. And so you want to be engaged in the event. So let's think about this. We're both kind of thinking out loud about what is the model of success that can be replicated. So the learnings from a successful, what is it, a $400 million economic impact we just had from T Swift?
Oh,
that's
yeah.
What they're projecting.
I back of the envelope to about 500 million. So we're somewhere in the $500 million range.
$500 million economic impact just this past weekend. So Michael and I are sitting here with all of you all listening, trying not just to deconstruct what happened, but then to reconstruct it, right? To take down the float and rebuild it so that we can do it again for big events like Super Bowl.
But I think you actually just got it. So we've been doing Mardi Gras for over 100 years. And I think that that Mardi Gras model, which includes all those attributes that you just discussed about inclusivity combined with individuality, which is interesting because usually inclusivity implies conformity. Here, it's really not. Here, again, as long as you're interesting, then you're included. Maybe that is the generic model that we need to keep replicating. And I do go back to that part of it is the joy and the freedom, but part of it is also about creating an environment that allows you to be free in a context of safety. And that's why, like you said, I'm so glad you called out public safety, but NOPD, Troop NOLA, everybody else, the sheriff, the DA, everybody, all the individuals who helped create an environment where people were liberated because it was a safe space. I think that is essentially, what we need to recreate. And then the real question or trick is that's going to be for the 150,000 people who are here. But can we actually translate that sense of on the ground joy to the 200 million people around the world? I think the good news is that New Orleans does photograph well those images of the individuals and the revelers and the architecture. Now the bridge lit up, which is lit up, by the way, the beautiful rainbow for Taylor Swift. I'm confident that we're going to be able to convey an image of joy and humanity that a Las Vegas, and I don't mean this to criticize Las Vegas, but the cold sterility of Las Vegas could never attempt to replicate, or a Phoenix or an LA. Paris did a good job of this with the Olympics, if you think about it. How many people after watching the Olympics said, we need to go to Paris, maybe not swim in the Seine, kind of poopy, but we need to go to Paris. And so I think that what Paris did such a great job of was there was a consistency in the branding and image that they showed, including the logo, which was a flame, but it was the face of a woman with lips. They really kind of, I'm thinking of the Finnish architect Eero Saarinen, and what he's done a number of airports like the TWA terminal in New York. And what he said is that in order for people to understand the form or the meaning of a place, you have to repeat the details over and over again. Paris did a great job with that. Taylor Swift did a great job with that. I think we need to repeat those consistent details now with the Super Bowl.
You're absolutely right. And we're totally onto something. So what we saw is that we as humans are craving connection. We're craving joy. We're craving positivity. We're craving belonging, inclusion, individuality, and freedom. So those are 7 elements that we've just captured just in our conversation based on what you and I witnessed. We participated in this past weekend. We felt it. It was palpable. We saw it. We experienced it. And so let's build events that recreate those human desires and those human foundational elements that we need right now in this state of our history, right? We need belonging and joy.
That's actually a really interesting framing, because if you take those 7 equities, let's call them that, as the goals, you can then create opportunities for people to experience them. And some of them are just places where serendipity and spontaneity can happen, like Bourbon Street. Some of them are places like Instagrammable moments where people can kind of brand themselves as part of something and send it out to their friends. And then there's some things that are just kind of, inherent to New Orleans, the intimacy of the urban setting, the walkability of the streets, the architecture, man, the weather. I mean, I was walking around, no offense to our listeners, but, I was saying, man, this is like San Diego with culture. It was just, it was warm. It wasn't too humid. But I think that it's a really good way of framing the goals for events. And then people will fill in the rest. My favorite Taylor Swift story of the weekend is that we were moving house this weekend. So that's usually not a very joyful event. It's a drag. But I was hearing Taylor Swift everywhere, in the stores, coming out of cars on the street. And we're in our storage unit, putting stuff in storage, which is not particularly joyful activity. And I start hearing Antihero or Cruel Summer, some Taylor Swift song. And I think to myself, Michelle, that's it. I've cracked. Taylor Swift is officially living inside my head now, because for sure there's nobody in the storage safe unit, but then I look outside and there's a guy just walking down the street with a wagon with speakers hooked up to a car battery, just pumping Taylor Swift into the atmosphere like a mosquito fogger, just pumping. And I know down this little side street, and I said, there's this mass participation in this event. which again, yeah, got people a sense, particularly with the elections a week away, gave people a sense of commonality that I think folks found desperately refreshing.
And you said something that is so important is you were scared for a second that Taylor Swift had infiltrated your brain. And then you realized, no, there's actually a person pulling a wagon with speakers. And what came to my mind, Michael, was how many people were engaged in this movement, in this event. So if we can offer, and now I want to open it up to all listeners who might be in a city who's trying to bring in their next event, whatever it could be, because I do want to create a model that other cities can replicate for events, right? Because that is my mission, is I'm on a mission to create cultures of connection to drive whatever results you have. Because as humans, we need connection. We've been dying at the vine ever since the pandemic. And guess what? This started happening before the pandemic. We are craving connection. So if we can find this model, and what really, again, I think we came up with 7 characteristics. And I think that underlining foundation is engagement. Create events where every single person, if they desire, can be a part, can have a role, can be a part of the celebration of the event. Because when you have an engaged, and this could be applicable to your workforce, when you have an engaged workforce, you're going to go farther, faster with whatever results you're going after. When you have an engaged family, right, you're going to have more joy. When you have an engaged culture, an engaged community, it's going to be cleaner and safer. We all have to be more of active participants. So going into the Super Bowl, one of the things when I was getting the tour, I didn't get to see you. You were somewhere, but it was for the PR committee of the Super Bowl, and it was the tour of the renovated Superdome.
Oh, yeah.
And what was really cool is that we got to see from the Greater New Orleans Foundation, was it Jay Cicero? They were handing out these flyers, become an ambassador. We need as many volunteers as possible. Be an ambassador for the Super Bowl. And I'm trying to get my daughter to fly in from college. Be an ambassador for the Super Bowl. Sure. If we can have every single person who chooses, who wants to be a part of this event, and it's so not just about football, and you are planted around the entire region, tell us what to do. In other words, people want to roll, they want to be engaged, and tell us how we can be a part of something bigger than ourselves. We need the big P, the big purpose.
Yeah, well, I think that what we saw with Taylor Swift, that's the model for this, is that people were intrinsically self-motivated. What's so fascinating about Taylor Swift is that we had this event which seemed at first glance to be planned. How could you have everybody so coordinated? How could you have all these restaurants all having their events? How could you have these pop-ups on the street? But actually what it was spontaneous and motivated by different individuals or institutions. And so I think what that says is that for the Super Bowl or any event, individuals have to be given given the tools that they need, which could be the talking points, which could be the swag, the collateral, but then they have to be empowered to express it in their own individual way. And if you do that and kind of have this radically decentralized model where you give people a set of tools and a goal and a vision and say, now go please and express it, that's how you're going to multiply the pervasiveness of a brand, of a message, of experiences, and create this totally immersive experience. Nobody told the guy with the wagon with the speakers that he had to go walk down, in the warehouse district, blasting Taylor Swift. But he was given, I guess, the tools of Spotify and her discography. And he just intuitively knew that was going to create joy. So I think that's the question, is how do you give people the tools to then go take it to their own place? And then you just see what happens.
I love the word you use, decentralized. And so Tim Williamson and I just did a podcast together. Tim Williamson, formerly of the Idea Village and now of New Society. And he's got such a brilliant entrepreneurial brain and vision. And so we were doing a podcast together and we were talking about the difference between the centralized model of Jazz Fest, which works very well, and then the decentralized model of Mardi Gras. And I think what we're realizing, if you can use, they're both successful in their own right. The decentralized model of Mardi Gras is where you give everybody the license, right, to be themselves and to participate how they choose. And what probably used to be, so speaking of seismic shifts, if we really did case studies of how Super Bowls used to be, I'm sure it was very top down, very centralized. This is the way it's done, very controlled. And I feel like with you as the Super Bowl czar, we're shifting more towards, hey, let's get everybody involved. This is so much more than just being told it's a football game. It's so much bigger.
No, that's a great insight, Michelle. So the Super Bowl historically was a game. It was literally the Super Bowl, the game. And that goes back to the early ones that were held here. Now it evolved into a spectacle, but still a game. So kind of like a Liza Minnelli show or going to the Sphere in Vegas. But now it's grown into effectively a mini Olympics. The Super Bowl will start on the Tuesday or Wednesday before the Sunday. So it's a 5 or 6 day event. It's a celebration. And yeah, in that sense, it's almost become a season, like a holiday season, like a Thanksgiving or a Christmas. And so that creates many, many more opportunities for individuals to interpret it their own way. And, you know, there's some guardrails on it, but there really aren't. They're really what the NFL cares about is that if Pepsi is one of the top sponsors, that Coke doesn't take out a huge ad opposite the Superdome. But otherwise, the more individuals are enjoying themselves in a series of events that culminate on that Sunday, but are not exclusively about that Sunday, the more meaning that Sunday has. Think about a great show like Coachella. Coachella is about the anti-Coachella, everything around it. Burning Man is probably not a bad example. The reason why people love Burning Man is that there's some creative constraints, like you're in the desert for a week, but then beyond that, you can express yourself in any way. And so I think that's what this has become, a week-long event with creative constraints, but then within which everybody is free to celebrate it in their own way. And let's get back to that point you made before, which is that these days where there's so much divisiveness and micro-segmentation, I think people find it very relaxing to be in a situation where your only qualification is, you know, which team are you rooting for? Or, you know, which Taylor Swift song are you going to karaoke? It's just, it kind of replenishes our soul. And that's more important than ever, as you said.
Absolutely. So let's get people excited about what we have to look forward to. So I was at the unveiling of the Super Bowl calendar where Todd Graves, who's the CEO of Raising Cane's, and he was in my book, and he just personifies how to build a positive culture. What's fascinating, he's now going to be the king of our Super Bowl parade. Sure is, yeah. So this press event, press conference was at Mardi Gras World. So again, we're taking that model of what we do really well with Mardi Gras, and we're having a Super Bowl parade, and Todd Graves is the king of that Super Bowl. And then we asked Drew Brees to be the ambassador of the whole entire Super Bowl. So we have Todd Graves, we have Drew Brees, who is also in my book. So if you think about it, we only have 2 billionaires in the state of Louisiana. We've got Todd Graves, right, the chicken finger guy, and we've got Gail Benson, the owner of the Saints and the Pelicans, and many more businesses, including many car dealerships and real estate firms and office buildings. And it's cool that we're asking all of these different people who represent Louisiana in business to be our ambassadors. Okay, so that's all I know. You know a whole lot more. So let's get our listeners excited about what they can expect that 5-day build up to the Super Bowl.
Well, there's going to be an NFL experience open to all fans in the convention center. That's become now kind of like an event within the event. For the first time ever, the governor of the state of Louisiana is going to be having a large pavilion down by the Riverside Hilton, which is going to be hosting corporate events, CEOs and executives coming in from around the world. Fox News is going to be broadcasting, I believe, from the French Quarter. There'll be a lot of programming around there. In Duncan Plaza, where the ride share is going to be, there's going to be a whole festival of New Orleans music and culture. So it's almost going to become like a combination football game, French Quarter Fest. Every time you turn around a corner, you're going to walk into something good to look at, good to listen to, good to eat. And you're going to have no choice but to participate because you're going to be in the thick of it. So I think people should make a plan to come down, not just for the game, but for the week before. Maybe go out of New Orleans for a couple of days, see beautiful places like Jean Lafitte, go up the river, but then just come here and walk around and enjoy not only one of the greatest games of the year, but one of the most human cities in America and in the world.
Wow. I didn't even know all of those things were happening. And I'm very excited and cannot wait to participate. And I'm sure all of you are tuning in, are excited. If you didn't have plans to come to the Super Bowl, to New Orleans, even if you can't get tickets to the game, you've heard from Michael, there are so many different events that allow you to participate however you wish to, with music, with architecture, with dance, with culture, with NFL experience and football. So please do come down. And I'm going to actually ask Michael one more question, because I'm sure if you're listening, you're thinking, because I know Michael, I would be like, what is his story? How in the world did he get to be the Super Bowl czar? So Michael, could you end with telling us what in the world is your story and how did you get here?
Golly, that's a lot to sum up in 2 minutes, but long story short, my mother, her family is from New Orleans. She married a Yankee, so I grew up in New York. I came back with my wife, who's from Denmark, after Katrina to be part of the rebuilding. And I think our organization that I now have been running now for over 15 years, Greater New Orleans, Inc., we're kind of like the utility infielder, to use a different sports metaphor, of the city and region. When something needs to be worked on, whether it's a national policy issue like insurance, a local issue like public safety, or now the Super Bowl, we're often called in to coordinate and catalyze people. We're just, like we said before, really good at getting disparate people to work together and producing results. So my actual title is I'm the Infrastructure and Economic Development Coordinator for the Super Bowl. And the governor asked me to come in and make sure that over 500 different infrastructure projects were coordinated and done in a timely fashion, because again, we just have a reputation for kind of getting things done. So that's how we ended up in this role. And I have to tell you that so many of the things we work on at GNO Inc. are midterm or long-term, 3 to 5 year projects. Getting a pothole filled is deeply satisfying. It's like getting a haircut. It might not last forever, but for like a beautiful shining moment, you've done something, you're in control, and you can see the results. So, that's why.
Looking good, Michael. And thank you for filling our potholes. Thank you for getting our streets paved. Thank you for wrapping our building with beautiful art and getting the Super Bowl ready for prime time. And like you said, it's not just the economic impact. It's an opportunity for any city, but it's our time, as New Orleans is hosting, it's our time to sell our story and to let people know what's really great about our region. And I do think that we do connection and joy better than any other region I've ever been a part of. And what we're trying to do to our listeners is figure it out and bottle it up so that you too can recreate what we're doing here in New Orleans, and you can unlock creativity, connection, and joy for your people, because I think that's what we all want a little more of. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Seismic Shift podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.